So 13.5 is about the cycling of matter. Matter cycles in and out of an ecosystem. We went over matter way back in chapter 2. Matter is anything that has atoms and takes up space. So matter cycles in and out of an ecosystem in certain ways. And then way back in chapter 2, we also talked about schnapps, the 6 most common elements that we are made of. And every single one of those has its own cycle. CHNOP and S. We're going to go over most of them, I think. So the basic structure of all cycles, plants to animals to decomposers and back. Good morning, Benjamin. So plants give energy to and get eaten by animals. Animals live their life, they die. Their chemicals get recycled back into the ground by decomposers. And they put it back into the soil, and plants suck up those chemicals by the roots, incorporate them into the plant body to get eaten by animals again. And the cycle continues. So in general, these are all called biogeochemical cycles. Bio means life. Geo means earth. So these are the cycling of chemicals between living things and the earth. So water, oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus. There's also a sulfur cycle. So we are made of all these things. Living things are. And most of the time we're talking about stuff out in nature. When living things die in nature, all these chemicals get put back into the soil to get sucked up by the roots by the plants and then eaten by the animals again. Repeating process, cycle. So biogeochemical cycle is the general term, and then there's specific ones for specific chemicals. The water cycle. This is when you learn in elementary school. Water cycles through different phases on Earth, circles through the atmosphere, to the surface, below the ground, and back through various processes. And now that you're older, we call it by its fancy science name, the hydrologic cycle. Prefix hydro means water. So it's just the fancy name for the water cycle. Water stored in clouds, precipitates down to the earth, snow, rain, hail. It soaks up into the ground. And it gets evaporated back up into the clouds. Also gets soaked up through the roots of plants. Plants put water into the air as a product of photosynthesis. That process is called transpiration. And the cycle repeats. The oxygen cycle. Oxygen cycles through an ecosystem by plants and animals. Plants release oxygen into the atmosphere as a waste product of photosynthesis. Animals take that oxygen, breathe it in, use it during cell respiration to make energy. And I like this saying, imagine if trees gave free Wi-Fi. We'd all be planting like crazy. It's a pity they only give us the oxygen that we breathe. So they actually give us something vastly more important, which is why they should stay in the ground and not be cut down.
They give us fossil fuels too. The plants.
Yeah, but that's not this cycle.
Oh, it's a different one.
Yes. We'll
Okay, makes sense. It's soon though.
Yeah.
Okay.
The nitrogen cycle. Plants absorb nitrogen from the soil. Animals eat the plants, travels up the food chain. A very important part of this cycle that doesn't happen in the others is bacteria convert nitrogen into a chemical called ammonia in the soil through a process called nitrogen fixation. So most plants and animals can't use nitrogen as it is. Bacteria have to fix it. So it's an actual usable energy source. And there are more steps. But the important part about the nitrogen cycle is the bacteria, the nitrogen fixation that happens by bacteria. The phosphorus cycle. Phosphorus moves through the food web and returns to the soil during the decomposition of dead animals. There's also a lot of phosphate in the earth, so in rocks, as rocks get broken down. It's called weathering. Water takes that phosphorus and puts it into bodies of water and eventually gets leached into the ground, where plants take it up and pass it on to the animals when it gets eaten. And the carbon cycle, which is one of our most important cycles. Apparently, we're not watching that video today. You have a video on your Edpuzzle, it's fine. Carbon flows between abiotic resources and biotic organisms and back again. Plants use carbon dioxide to make food through photosynthesis. Animals give off that carbon dioxide as a waste product when they breathe out. That's okay, Raul. It's being recorded. I'll post it later. Whatever you missed. And combustion, or the burning of fossil fuels, also adds carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. And that is what is happening right now. Because us humans like that process. For some reason, we can't find another one, or we don't want to. But that is what your Edpuzzle is about this week. There's more details on that. All right, we are going to switch over to 13.6. And pyramids model the distribution of energy and matter in an ecosystem. So we did food chains, we did food webs. Now we talk about pyramids and why that shape is important. So energy distribution, the bottom level, which are the producers, always store the most energy. They suck up all of those carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, sulfur out of the ground. And they make their own food within their own cells. So they always store the most energy when it comes to food chains and food webs. Producers manufacture the food that supports the rest of the entire ecosystem. The herbivores, the carnivores, the omnivores, whatever level we put them in. Producers always have the most energy, so they support all the rest of the levels. And the top level, which are the large carnivores or omnivores, actually store the least amount of energy. So they have to eat the most food because they store the least amount of energy. Energy is always transferred up the food chain or up the pyramids. We learned this last week when we drew out our food chains, and arrows always point up because that's where energy goes. We don't give energy to our food. We take energy from our food. They give it to us. And a pyramid is used because its shape shows that less and less energy is transferred up between trophic levels. So when the herbivores eat the producers, so in the picture, it's a squirrel. When the squirrel eats the grass, they don't get to keep all that energy that the grass produces. And when the next level, the secondary consumers eat the primary consumers, they don't get to keep all that energy. So energy is lost at every single level, which is why the pyramid represents the energy. Less and less energy gets to the top. It's actually called the 10% law. An average of 10% of the total energy stored at each trophic level is transferred to the next level. This means that 90% of the energy is lost. And most of the time it is lost as heat. So the food we eat, we only get to keep 10% of the energy of whatever we eat. The rest gets lost as heat, which makes sense because we have to keep an internal body temperature of 98.6 degrees. And that is done by our muscles, and our muscles are constantly functioning, so constantly burning through that food that we eat. So it's the average of 10%. Sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 20, but the average is out at 10% and call it the 10% rule or the 10% law. Biomass. Important vocab word. When we talk about mass, we're talking about how much something weighs. Biomass is the mass of all organisms in a given area. So if you add up all of our weights in this room, which right now it's just me, most of the time I do this in a classroom full of students, but it would be the biomass of our biology class. The 10% of energy that does transfer up to the next level is incorporated as biomass at the next level. So the 10% that we keep gets incorporated into our cells and into our muscles and into our bones, wherever it needs to go to support us and keep us functioning.